Welcome to Learning Photography with Duck. Here's your host, Duck.
Good evening, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Learn Photography with Duck. My name is Duck. I am a local photographer in the Shelton area. And tonight's episode is general Q&A. So if you have any questions about photography in general, whether it's about your camera, about lighting, about composition, or editing, feel free to just give me your questions and I'll try my best to give you an honest answer. Before we get into that, I hope everybody's been staying safe. The COVID-19 curve has flattened out and it looks like we're on a decline, as long as people understand that they still have to respect social distancing so there isn't a flare-up. So I hope you guys are safe and following social distancing. That being said, because things have been relaxing, there's been some discussions about getting into some actual physical meetups. Obviously with a certain amount of respect for each other's spaces, but at least we can go out and be able to do something outside of just being cooped up at home. I've been in discussion with Robert Fielder he's the admin at the Hartford Amateur Photographers Group on Facebook. He and I are talking about getting a group together to go out to, I can't remember, I lost track of where we're going. Not New London. Well, anyhow, we're planning a little trip, a little get together where we can do some architectural photography and maybe even some street photography. Hopefully within the month. Okay, so I'll be posting it on my Facebook page, and he'll be posting it on his Facebook page. Mine, of course, is Learn Photography with Duck, and his is Hartford Amateurs Photographer Group. All right, so hopefully, if you're not a member of that group, feel free to send in your request to join, and he'll let you in. All right, that said, other thing that I want to get together for myself, something that I do every year, is what I call a multiplicity shoot. And that's where we get together in a group and we split off into pairs. And then what you have to do is create a scene. You check out your background, you establish your scene, and then you populate that scene with yourself. So you become your own model and you put yourself in several positions. And where the trick comes in is every position you want to interact with yourself within the scene. So you're basically telling a little story where you are the actor in several positions, and then afterwards you bring it into Photoshop, and using layers, you create layer masks and you populate an entire scene all with images of yourself. It's a lot of fun. It's a challenge. It challenges you both on the scene, in front of the camera, behind the camera, and then it challenges you with the editing. We've had a lot of fun in the past, and I'm looking to do it probably twice this year if we're lucky. Or my goal was to do it twice this year. Unfortunately, this COVID-19 thing has put a little bit of a kink in the armor, as they say. So I'm going to try to shoot for 2 days while the weather's nice and warm. Somewhere close to here in Shelton, and then probably something closer to Hartford, New London, not New London, Norwich area. Norwich, that's where we're going with Robert. So somewhere up, mid-state. So that way, we can get a lot of people together. Additionally, I'm hoping to be able to do some in-studio workshops. That's still up in the air. I don't know how that's going to go with this, social distancing thing. I have a small studio, so, it's not like we can maintain social distancing with a large group. So we may look to do something with lighting on an outdoor environment where we use speed lights in order to have off-camera flash. So that's something I'm working on. So if that interests you, just keep an eye out for it. Okay. And that's pretty much it for what's coming up. So why don't we just get right into the Q&A, because I really don't have anything prepared as far as a point of discussion for tonight. So I will open up the floor to, I guess, Carol, because you came prepared.
Yes, yeah. Like I said, I'm starting taking pictures of birds. I have some bird feeders in my backyard, and anyways, I saw a goldfinch, through my Florida room, and maybe 10 feet away from the glass, and I took a picture. It was a really nice picture, but I wanted to know how to sharpen and noise reduction. I couldn't put the camera up right against the glass because that would have scared the bird away. And anyways, I just wanted to know what's the best way to sharpen.
Okay, well, I first of all, how much of the image is the actual bird? Is it like small within the frame of the image, or
it's if you could picture a 4x6,
yep,
and in the center is a bird on the bird feeder, it's like that. It's not close, but I could crop it,
right,
which I wanted to do, but I wanted to be able to sharpen it.
Did you publish it online by any chance? Is that something I can look up? No, okay. All right. And the other thing, do you recall what your settings were? What was your shutter speed?
It was pretty fast.
Okay.
It was I did it on because I knew I didn't have much time. I did it on auto ISO, and I did a aperture. It was aperture priority, and it was like a low, the low end, maybe like a 4 point something.
Okay, so you wanted to get a little bit black background blur. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Because the key.
It's a nice picture, but I just wish it could be sharpened.
Okay. The thing with sharpening is typically speaking of Robert is joining us. Awesome. We just got finished talking about you, Rob. He's probably still setting up. So the thing with any kind of nature photography where you're photographing some kind of animal is the biggest concern, of course, is any movement on their end. Okay. The faster their movement is, the faster your shutter speed needs to be. Okay. And you were lucky enough that the bird was in a pretty much stationary position because it was on the bird feeder. All right. Which presents us with our second technical point, and that's where we placed our focus. And do you know offhand how you have your focus set up on your camera? Is it matrix? Is it spot? Is it...
I have matrix.
Matrix. Okay. What I would suggest you do is to consider taking it off of matrix and putting it on spot. Okay? Because the way matrix works is there are certain points on the sensor that become the focus points. All right. And there are a couple of ways that a camera will will search for focus. All right. And the most common one is what's called contrast focusing. So what it does is it looks for the contrast of color or light, in this case, all right, between dark and light, usually on edges. All right. So edges, all right, where like my arm from the background, my shirt from the background, it looks for that contrast. And then once it finds that contrast, it uses that contrast to gain focus. All right. So if that edge is blurry, it knows it's out of focus and it tries to use the lens to create a nice sharp edge. What happens with matrix is you have multiple points on your sensor. So it's looking at all these multiple points and it's determining, okay, out of these multiple points, which ones are the sharpest. Okay. And it's going to compare that against the signal that it sends out. All right. The infrared signal it sends out bounces off the subject and comes back and it says, okay, whichever one the closest is, I'm going to assume that's the subject. All right. And it's going to try to use that contrast to focus based on what it's receiving as input as what the subject is. Okay. So now you have your subject, which is the bird, right next to something that is not a subject, which is the bird feeder. All right. But if the bird is a little bit further back, the camera is going to detect that bird feeder first. Okay. So again, it goes back to what I always say. The camera is a very smart, dumb object. All right. It's a dumb piece of equipment. It's very smart in the way it does things, but it's very dumb because it does not know what it is that you want to photograph. All right. So you have to override certain things. Right. And in this case, you need to override what the camera thinks is the subject. Okay. And one way of doing it is by telling the camera, no, I don't want to focus on the bird feeder. I want to focus on the bird. Okay. And the way we do that is by reducing our field of focus. Wrong choice of words. Our choice of focus would be a better term. What we use mechanically to choose our focus. Now, me personally, I'm a big fan of spot focus because it allows me to place the focus exactly where I want it. And in terms of photographing living creatures, most often than not, that point of focus is going to be the eye. We are, by all psychological standards, we are drawn to focus on people's eyes. We look at people's eyes first before we look at anything else. And it's the same thing with animals. We look, we isolate the face and we look at their eyes, and we use that as the kind of like the landing point of our gaze when we're looking at our subject, and then we take the rest of it in. So looking for sharpness in the eye is the critical point. By having a spot focus, I can make sure that I place my focus on the eye, gain my focus, and then I can recompose very quickly. Now, it tends to be tricky if the subject is moving, because then other things come into play. But we'll just stick to your situation here. Hey, Robert, do me a favor, mute yourself.
That might have been me.
Yeah, if you can just mute your microphone, that'd be great. Awesome, thanks. All right. So you basically will be telling the camera, hey, I want to focus on this point. Not on anything else. Not on the background, not on the bird feeder, nothing. Okay? And the thing is, most of the time, most cameras today allow you to move that focus point anywhere you want. So if you follow the rule of thirds with your composition and you understand the scene you're looking at, you can say, hey, I'm going to shift my point of view, my focus point to the right, because as I'm looking at the bird feeder, I want the bird feeder a little bit to the left, and I know the bird's going to land on the right-hand side. So I'm going to favor my focus point to the right, so I don't have to do a lot of, focus, recompose, focus, recompose. Okay? So that will allow you to gain sharper focus, because now the camera doesn't have to search out all these other points to determine what's what. And it'll avoid that frustration of you having to wait for the camera while it's doing that focus searching, all right, which is very annoying because that eats up time. While you're waiting for the camera going the bird will be flying off. All right. So being able to switch to a spot focus allows you to, even before the bird lands, you know where they're going to land, pre-focus there. So that way when they land, you're right there. And the camera doesn't have to now search through all these focus points. And then you click, 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 click. All right. So that's on the camera side during the field work. Okay. Now you open it up. Oh, one more tip. Digital film is free. All right. What I normally tell people is don't be stingy with your frame rate when shooting animals. All right. That first frame may not necessarily be your best frame. But if you take 3 consecutive shots, all right, by the time your camera is, but when you first press your shutter button, you're still setting up, okay? By the time the camera takes the second shutter frame, you've already kind of settled in. You're now breathing with the camera. You're a little bit more relaxed, all right? And that camera is going to be a lot more still. All right, so usually the second or third frame are the better frames where you're going to gain sharpness. So that might be a habit for you to look into, is going click, click, click. All right, and then when you open it up, see which one of those 3 is the sharpest. All right, and it's done so instantaneously.
Sorry, if you're between shooting in the air, when I'm outside, versus when I'm inside through glass and my camera is not right up against the glass because,
Yeah, no, that's okay. Yeah. Regardless of whether there's a piece of glass, it's still going to be the same. All right. You want to maximize your chances of getting a great image. Okay. Well, we'll discuss other, some tricks to be able to get close to the glass in a little bit here, but I just want to kind of get to the answer on your question. Yeah.
I have a question before you move on to the processing. Will the glass, will the camera try and focus on the glass instead if you have that in between?
Good question. The answer is not very simple, but I am actually going to be answering that specific question when I return back to the situation with the glass, because that presents a few little problems on its own that I want to address. But I want to answer her question of sharpening her images. But I promise I will be getting back to that. Okay. All right. So that's how you can, increase your chances of getting a good sharp image at the moment. Now you got it, you open it up and you realize that it's a little bit soft. Okay. Now this is where we go back to that edge contrast. Whenever we do any kind of sharpening, the software is going to look at that edge contrast, and wherever it's a little blurry, it's going to try to correct for it. And the abilities have been progressing in leaps and bounds as to what the software can do. Now, about 10 years ago, Adobe started working with the artificial intelligence of image processing, and it's only been recently that it's really come to fruition. And Rob, do me a favor, mute your microphone. Thanks. It's only recently that image processing using artificial intelligence has really taken a hold and getting awesome results. Now, Adobe uses its own image sharpening software, but there are other image sharpeners out there. Image Ninja is one of them that's gotten really good, and there's a couple more. But what it does is it looks for that edge contrast, and it says wherever it's blurry, I'm going to try to artificially sharpen it by analyzing the edges and trying to figure it out. It's going to be limited to the quality of your original. So if your original is just a little bit blurry, it can probably do a very decent job at automatically sharpening those edges. But if it's really blurry, unfortunately, there's not very much that you can do. One of the side effects of sharpening is that you got to keep in mind how photography works. Photography captures various degrees of lightness and darkness. All right, so it's working with shades of grays. If an edge is blurry, what happens is the pixel density in terms of shades of gray, the pixel densities from its neighboring pixels shifts. All right, and as it shifts away from the edge, it starts picking up whatever color is being picked up from its background, and it starts mixing. So what we see as blur, the software sees as a shift from one color to another. And now it has to try to decide at what point do I break from this color to this color in order to create a sharper edge. And it does that by shifting the contrast of the pixels. Now what happens is, as the shift goes across and picking up color from the background, and it starts shifting the contrast of that, we're getting away from the color of the subject and picking up a muddled mix of subject color and background color that is now being sharpened. And this creates an ugly looking artifact. Some of the artifacts is color fringing. The other type is a halo. You'll see this haloing effect going around your edges. There's no easy correction for this. Like I said, Adobe AI has done, wonders with being able to kind of control this, but it's not 100% there. There are ways you can artificially, manipulate your image, but in certain areas, you're going to be manipulating on a pixel to pixel level. And do you really want to spend that kind of time? So normally what I suggest is if it's a little blurry, add some sharpening, see if it'll, work. And then at that point, if it introduces any kind of haloing or any kind of color shifts, correct for that. Otherwise, what you might want to say is, you know what? No matter what I do, it's not going to fix it. You either scrap it or you say, okay, maybe if I add a little bit of motion blur, we can kind of camouflage the fact that I flubbed it, all right, by now making it a purposeful act. And you can actually get some creative modifications that, enhance the image in that respect. But to answer your question, you can use auto sharpening. You can use a high frequency separation sharpening and things like that. There are a few methods, but usually once you miss focus, that's it.
And another question, what's the difference between sharpening and denoise?
All right, so sharpening basically works on creating that contrast of edges. Denoise, all right, so when we take a picture, each pixel is going to pick up the light value that it's hitting it, okay? And because each pixel is independent of its neighbor, this pixel may pick up, let's say, 59%, while its neighbor may pick up 58%. Okay? So now when we boost the signal, it doesn't stay 1% difference going up. As we boost the signal, the distance between the two gets greater because it's done on a logarithmic scale. All right. So now if we go from 58 and 59 to, let's say, 70, all right, you may get 73 or 74. So now there's a greater difference, a greater contrast between those two pixels, making one look a little brighter than its neighbor, and now it starts looking grainy. That's where we get that sensor noise. So what denoise does is it looks at a cluster and say, okay, well, this cluster is all within that 72% range, even though we have 73, 75, 78, 77s. And I'm just going to kind of even those out so that there's less difference between its neighbors. So what it's doing is taking that signal that got exaggerated and bringing them closer together. All right, and what it does is it smooths out that noise so it doesn't look as noisy or grainy. That's what denoise does. Hopefully that explained it properly for you. Okay. All right, so now I want to go back to that glass situation and explain how you can, get around it and actually answer Mark's question as well. All right, and I'm going to use, I'm involved in a couple of forums, and one forum that I left years and years ago had a bird photographer that always got these amazing bird photographs. And he did it all from his front window. He had a big plate glass window, bay window. And what he did is directly in front of the window, he built purposely built a bird, I don't want to say sanctuary, but a bird habitat for wild birds. And he placed tree branches, okay, and other, foliage and stuff, so that wherever he pointed his camera, it created a scene. And he had little on the backside, away from the camera, he would carve a little depression into the wood, and he would seed it with suet and seeds and things like that in different areas. And then he would close his blinds or close his curtains, but only allow for his lens up against the glass. And he would just sit there and he would wait, and he'd know that within minutes, he'd get all kinds of birds coming in. And because they were up close to his window, he didn't really need to use a long lens. I think he had a 70-200 on his camera, and he got fantastic images. All right, so how do we deal with glass? The first thing you have to understand is angle of incident, angle of reflection. All right, an incident is any light source that generates a light. And the reflection is any reflection that we see in the glass that's reflecting that light source. All right, so one of the things that you have to worry about is not picking up any kind of reflection being bounced from, some outside source. All right, so one of the biggest issues is any lights that you have on behind you in the room as you're shooting through the glass. It's going to pick up that reflection in your camera. All right, and like I said earlier, the way the camera wants to focus is it looks for that contrast edges. And if it sees a bright light source against a very dark background, it's going to look for that, and it's going to assume, falsely, that light reflection is your possible subject. So it's going to try hunting for it. All right. Now, because it's glass and it's, transparent, and the infrared signal kind of just goes right through it, it's going to have a very hard time, but yet it knows that something's there, so it's going to try to hunt for it. And this is where you really get into that annoying zit, 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 with the zoom lens. All right, so one of the tricks is to make sure that it's dark behind you. If you can't get it dark behind you, what I suggest, give me 1 second. Let me see if I can find, yep, here it is. What I suggest is creating something like this. All right. This is something that I use in my studio whenever I'm photographing any kind of shiny subjects like glass or stainless steel. All right. I have this hole that I poke my lens through. All right. And if there's any reflection in the glass, what it's going to do is it's going to reflect this black. All right. So it's not going to pick up any shiny spots. All right. And you can very easily do that with, some black foam board. Or like I said, just turn off your lights behind you. All right. And that allows you to, you can take something like this. All right. Let's say I'm pointing at my green screen. You're looking at a shot of my studio. But let's say this is the glass here. All right. And looking out. What you can do is take this and tape it to your window or hold it up somehow. All right. And then just this little area becomes your viewport. Any birds on the other side isn't going to notice any kind of movement behind the glass and, flitter off because they're scared. All right. Or like I said, you can shut your shades, your curtains, all right, so that only your lens is visible. And you can get right up to that glass without really scaring them off. If this is something that really interests you, I would consider leaving a tripod up against the glass with your camera, so that whenever you see any kind of activity, you can very quickly move to the camera and click, click, click. All right. The other thing you have to consider is the cleanliness of the glass. You want to make sure that you keep your glass clean, not only on the interior, but the exterior as well. Now, one thing you have to keep in mind, a lot of these windows in our houses are double paned glass. So that means you're going to have 2 reflective surfaces. All right. But if you really think about it, you're going to have 4 reflective surfaces to contend with, because each piece of glass actually has 2 reflective surfaces, the inside and the outside. All right. And then if you have 2 pieces of glass, you have the inside, the outside, the inside, and the outside of the 2 pieces of glass. Each one of those is a reflective surface. So you have to be aware of where your light is. Now, we discussed being able to control the lights behind you and the interior. You can turn them off. But when you're dealing with outdoor light, if you are looking through a window where the sun tracks in front of your window, that is going to present a problem, because certain times of the day it's going to be reflecting off your glass, and there's really nothing you can do from that other than move to another window. So those are the considerations that I'd point out to you when shooting through glass. Okay, so get close to the glass, keep that glass clean, and then just watch your lights. Mark, did that answer your question?
Yeah. That was,
Awesome.
Very complete. Thanks.
Okay. Carol, that was a fantastic question. We covered a lot of different topics
thanks.
there. That was
I'll post some pictures of my birds.
awesome. Yeah. But your shutter speed is going to be key in that. Okay. All right. You want your shutter speed to be really high. All right. Anybody else got any questions? Jill, Mark, sure.
This is it could lead to a pretty long discussion, I suppose. But just when shooting portraits, I know that sort of the state of the art processing is frequency separation. I watched a couple videos on it, and it looks very long and complicated. I've never attempted it, but I'm wondering what your preferred methods are for working on portraits like that.
Okay, that's actually a really good question. Frequency separation is typically used in a lot of fashion advertising photography, because it's a great technique of really eliminating a lot of flaws in the skin. With general portraiture, you don't really need that kind of high-end development on a photograph. So me personally, I really don't do that type of editing on a personal portrait. I look for things like temporary blemishes, things that, like pimples and bruises, little scabs or whatever. Those tend to be what I look out for and eliminate. But other than that, if you just use a little bit of selective softening, that tends to cover up a lot. That being said, The other thing you have to consider is, how is this image going to be displayed? If it's just going to be displayed on a website, more than likely any little flaws aren't even going to be noticeable. Where it's going to be noticeable is if you're going to be doing any kind of high definition printing. All right. If you're, let's say, printing a canvas, you'll never see those flaws. It's going to be eliminated by the texture of the canvas. The canvas tends to hide a lot of that fine detail. If you're doing a 17 by 22 portrait, at that point, yeah, you might want to take a little extra effort, in creating a nice, clean image. But often than not, I don't think you even need to do, frequency separation on the majority of your portrait work. So I don't know if that's what you wanted to hear. But
that's fine. Yeah, because so that's more like if you're doing like high fashion or something like that.
Correct. Yeah, because a lot of the time the high fashion magazines, the purpose of fashion photography isn't about the person. It's about the cosmetic, the fashion accessory, the hairstyle, whatever it is. So what they'll do is they'll literally edit out any personality from the person and make it kind of like the generic person. That's why, a lot of models, unless they have a very unique facial feature, a lot of models, they just blend into the next model. It's like, yeah, that's a pretty face. Same as that pretty face, which is the same as the pretty face I saw yesterday. It's going to be the same as the pretty face I'm seeing tomorrow.
Right.
However,
okay. Yeah.
with personal portraits, these are people that have personality that are going to be seen by family members who knows that personality. So that becomes a trick. You need to capture that personality and retain that personality in their photograph, even through your editing, so that you don't lose that. So I won't go too crazy.
Something preferred for just softening up wrinkles a little bit.
I don't want to get myself in trouble, but women tend to like that. Absolutely.
That's correct.
The thing is, yeah, you want to.
It's rugged.
Yeah, you want to present the person in their best light. All right, and the trick with photography, whether it's portrait work, whether it's architectural work, commercial product work, is photography captures an instant and freezes it. It freezes it for inspection for all eternity. So you have the luxury of inspecting for flaws. All right. So once we see the flaws, they really start you can't unsee it, as they say. So by removing the flaws, it's not that you're making the person perfect. It's that you're removing any distractions that take away from their true essence. Okay? But there is, like I said, with high fashion photography, there's you can go beyond and making them kind of like a nameless person. All right? When you're dealing with personal portraits, you want to remove the flaws so people can see their true identity. All right, so little hairs that are astray, lint on clothing, pimples. For guys, if they shaved and missed a spot, the stray hairs. ladies, yes, softening the wrinkles a little bit, reducing the pores a little bit with a little bit of softness definitely helps. Enhancing the makeup a little bit so that it's, you don't want to make them gaudy, but you want to make sure that they present well. So you remove all the flaws and you enhance, not exaggerate, but you enhance the better qualities, and you'll be good to go. And I don't think you even need high frequency separation. I would suggest that you practice it, because there are times where it comes in handy, but 99% of the time you probably won't even be using it. So, okay.
Good. Yeah, thanks.
I have
Awesome.
a question.
Yes, Pam.
I'm wondering, well, I have two actually. One is really easy, maybe. It's when you're shooting into the sun, like say you have the sun off to the left, right in front of you, and for like a seascape,
Okay.
and you get all these ridiculous little halo things all over the place.
Yep.
How do you get around that?
Don't shoot into the sun.
Sometimes, it's really beautiful with boats all around.
Yeah. All right. Actually,
I tried going up to like F-18, try
Yes.
it that way. It's a little bit better.
All right. Let me see if I can pull up an image here. Give me 1 second. I want to see if I can find it in my Lightroom.
Okay.
And let's see. Oh, what happened? Oh, here we go. All right. All right, here we go. One of the things that I like doing is taking photos of flowers against the sun. Let's see if I can find
Against the sun?
against the sun. Yeah. Oh, here we go. Here we go. Okay.
Mhm.
All right. That very bright spot there is the sun coming through the trees.
Mhm.
Okay.
Mhm.
Now, what you're not seeing is what you described as those little colored halos, dots.
Right.
All right. We'll get to that in a second.
Yeah, they're green usually.
Green or blue, or sometimes even magenta, depending
Yeah.
on your lens, and depending on how the light hits the lens. Okay. But there's a couple things at play here. All right. The first thing, obviously, is shooting into the sun. You have to be careful, because if you've ever taken a magnifying glass, all right, and you put it, so that the sun is hitting the magnifying glass, and then you focus that beam, and you can fry the ants.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
You have to keep in mind that your lens is a series of magnifying glasses. You have to be very careful you don't fry your...
So you can fry your sensor?
You can very easily fry your sensor. Okay? So you have to be careful. All right? You can shoot into the sun. I've done it, but there's that fraction of a percent that it can cause serious damage. So you don't want to just keep it pointed towards the sun all the time. All right? Get your shot and then move on. All right?
Okay.
What occurs when you see those colored ringlets is the diffraction of that light going through that series of glass, and creating that little halo effect. And what that is just the internal reflection of light bouncing inside the tunnel of your lens that creates that lens flare. Okay. A lot of people.
Because you hold your camera?
I'm sorry?
Is that because of the way you hold your camera? If you hold it flat going
No,
through it, or if you're a little bit...
It goes to angle of incidence, which is the sun, and angle of reflection off the surface of your glass. When you're closer in line with the sun, you're going to see that, diffraction happening in your lens. Mm-hmm. All right, the lens flare. You're going to see it a lot. It's going to be a lot more prevalent because the angle of incidence. All right, if you're pointing your camera here, let me switch to. Let's see. Let me switch here. All right, the sun is there. All right, my subject is here, and then I'm aiming my lens at that subject with the sun behind it. The angle of incidence is there, and it's in line with my lens. If it's completely in line, that light is just going to go straight down the tunnel and hit my sensor. Not a big deal. Mm-hmm. As soon as I start putting an angle, that incidence is going to hit that glass at an angle, and that glass is designed to force that light down the barrel. So it comes in at an angle and it automatically starts bending. It's that bending that creates this lens flare, because as the light comes in, all right, the light's being forced down the tunnel, but it's also reflecting off of that glass. All right. And if it reflects on the next set of glass, that's usually where you start getting that lens flare. All right. Now, some people like lens flare. Me personally, I love lens flare. It just adds that other element into the image. Okay. Huh. If you don't like lens flare, what you need to do is you need to have something in front of the lens to shield that direct sunlight hitting it. Okay? So the minute you start seeing that lens flare, all right, what you can do is, if you have a hat, like I usually wear a hat, I'll put my hat as a sunshade to shade the front of my lens. All right, or
that's clever.
Get a lens shade, a lens hood, that's long enough. But some of the wide lenses, it'll never work. So I'll take it. You can use your hand close to the lens so that it's out of sight of your. It's not in your image, but it's enough to create a shade on the front element of your lens. Actually, I got a wide lens right here, all right? This has a lens hood, but you can see it's very shallow, okay?
Yeah.
And this lens, it's a fisheye lens, so it really, curves outward. So any light hitting this can potentially create that lens flare, all right? So if I'm looking through the camera and I'm seeing lens flare, all right, and you can tell the direction, all right. You'll see where if the lens flare is going like this, that it's coming from here. If it's going like this across your image, it's coming from there. So what I'll do is I'll cup my hand, and looking through, I'll place myself so that I can shade the front of the glass without my hand being in the image. Okay. And that will eliminate.
That's a good tip.
Yeah, absolutely. Being able to shade your lens usually eliminates that. So.
Thank you. That's a big help.
Now, as far as your aperture, really doesn't have an effect on lens flare. All right.
It doesn't. Oh.
Because it's basically its reflection off of the front glass element. All right. But when it comes to, something like this, where, you're creating that ring of light, because this is what's called specularity. All right. Each one of those little circles of light is a point of light coming through the trees. And that point of light, in this case, is the sun. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
So the aperture setting is going to determine the quality of what's called bokeh. All right? The quality of that circular aspect. So in this case, you see that there are there's 7 points, 8 points. All right. You're actually seeing, because it's not a full circle, you're actually seeing the blades of the diaphragm of my aperture. All right. Each one of these little flat surfaces here. All right. That's the leading edge of the blade of my aperture.
I get it.
Okay. So the smaller you get, you can actually create stars. All right.
Right.
And if you've ever seen, I don't know if I can find it. Let's see if I can find it really quickly. I did a shoot with a buddy of mine who spins fire. And we did some underneath a street light. And what I did is I closed up my aperture a lot so that the light from the street lights were actually little stars. And of course now when I need to find it, I'm not going to be able to find it.
Yeah. I get it though, because I've done this.
Yeah. Okay. Like you've probably seen it. So that comes from what happens is when you start closing up your aperture, you're actually choking the light coming through. All right, and because your aperture is a series of blades that close up, right? I'm sure you've seen diagrams of an iris, camera iris. There are a series of blades that kind of shut and create smaller circles, right? Where one blade and another one meet, it creates that little corner. That allows a little bit more light to spill past the corner, and it shoots as a ray outward. All right, and that's what creates that star. So the tighter you get it, there's more light in those corners coming through, and that spill is what creates the star. When you start opening it up, there's more volume in the center than there are in the corners. So it diminishes that star effect. So
interesting.
Anyhow, that's the technical aspect of that.
Yeah, that's interesting.
All right. And
could I ask one more question?
Sure.
Totally different.
Yep.
I recently just got into macro photography. And I don't know if you want to talk about macro.
Sure.
Here's 100 millimeter roll.
Yeah. Here's a very tight aperture on this photograph. You can see all the points of light from the from across the river. They're all stars. Yeah. All right. They're beautiful. Eight pointed stars because my aperture blades are eight pointed. Eight blades. So anyhow. All right.
Beautiful.
So macro photography. What in particular are you looking for? Just like general tips, or
it is so well. I'll tell you what I have problems with. I have problems with depth of field. So it's 100 millimeter Rokinon
Oh, nice
random
lens.
focus lens, and I have it on a Sony A7 III.
Okay.
And it's not quite compatible. It works, but sometimes I'll look up something and it'll say this lens is not
Right.
compatible, but it works, and I've gotten some great shots. But the depth of field is so incredibly minute
Yes.
that I'm never sure exactly what f-stop to shoot it at. And what I've been doing is putting a flash on and shooting at anywhere from 22 to 32.
Okay.
And so I always need light.
Yes. Yeah.
And even then, it's not always clear. Like even at 32, it's not totally completely sharp
Right.
all the time.
Okay. So let me just.
So I guess sharp. What can I do? I'm just wondering do most macro photographers crop their images?
Depends. Anytime you crop, you will always be losing image data. So the goal is obviously to not crop. All right. However, you're going to be obviously limited to how close you can get with your lens, because even a macro lens has a established minimum focusing distance. Okay.
I think mine's 12 inches.
Yeah, but with macro lenses, there's actually depending on the type of lens, there could be two focusing distances. All right. One would be your normal focusing distance, and the other one would be your macro focusing distance, which tends to sometimes on macro lenses tends to be really close to the lens. So like, for example, I have the Canon 100 millimeter lens, and I can get my lens very, very close to the subject. I mean, within inches, and still be able to focus.
Wow.
All right. But once I go too close, I'm out of focus. If I go too far, I'm out of focus. And then now I have to back up a little bit further in order to get to that second focus point. All right. So macro lenses are they're a strange animal. Okay. And then some lenses are labeled as macro only because it may be a long lens that allows you to focus up to a very close distance, but that close distance is still an arm's length away. Okay. So macro lenses, like I said, are a strange animal. But what you have to consider is your depth of focus. Depth of focus is controlled by your aperture, right? And you understand that the bigger your opening, the narrower your depth of focus is going to be. The smaller your opening, the wider your depth of focus is going to be.
Right.
Okay. Now, on top of that depth of focus, however deep that is determined by subject to camera distance. All right. So, for example, I'll bring my lens back up. If I have my subject, I have my lens. okay, at only a few inches, my depth of focus might be 1/4 of an inch. All right.
Mm-hmm.
So if I have
Mm-hmm.
2 inches here and from subject to lens, I have 1/4 inch here. All right. If I make this 2 feet, all right, my depth of focus now will be 4 inches. As an example. All right.
Okay.
Simply because of the scaling effect of distance subject to lens. All right.
Mm-hmm.
The reason that works is because your lens, like we've already established, has a minimum focal distance. All right, and maximum is usually infinity, way, 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 way out there. All right, but it's that minimum focusing distance. All right, when we focus on a subject, the point of focus that is going to be the sharpest is where the focal plane is. Okay, and let me see if I can illustrate that. All right, and that focal plane is the point at which the lens focuses. Right, and it's this imaginary plane that is parallel to your sensor. All right, so you focus out, focus in, focus out, focus in until you gain focus. All right, and the point of focus is that very, very thin plane, arbitrary plane that we place. Okay, now once we've established that plane, our aperture determines how deep from that plane our focus is. And it's always going to degrade faster closer to the camera. So it's going to, we have sharp focus here. As we get closer to the camera, we get blurrier and blurrier and blurrier. Makes sense, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yes.
And from here to here, we only have a foot. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
From here to here, we have infinity. So our depth of focus is going to degrade slower in this direction. All right.
Oh. Uh-huh.
And the typical rule of thumb, before I get to that. All right, so depth of focus, our depth of focus is determined by how big or how small our aperture is. The bigger the aperture, the more light bounces and the blurrier our image is because our light is bouncing. It's not being focused. It's just bouncing down that barrel of the lens. All right? When we choke up our aperture and make it really, really small, suddenly that light is now focused down that barrel. It's not bouncing around a lot. All right? So it's hitting our sensor a little bit more precisely. And that's what creates our sharper image. Okay? Follow me so far?
That's a great picture of depth of
All right.
field.
Now, I want you to...
I know what depth of field is, but that's a great picture.
All right, so now that you have that picture in your head, I want you to think about those little light photons, little particles of light, traveling from whatever's being reflected in our scene. Way over there, we have mountains and trees and valleys and hills and grass and all that stuff. All right, that light way over yonder is traveling miles before it hits our lens. So it's got the ability to do a lot of this between there and here. From our subject, we're only traveling a little bit, so the light is being reflected off our subject and traveling this way. It's not it hasn't had a chance to do a lot of wobbling as it goes towards the camera. All right? That's why
Right.
it's a little sharper in front of that plane of field than it is behind it.
The plane of field.
Plane of focus. Plane of focus.
Plane of
Sorry.
focus.
Yes.
Okay.
Thanks for picking
Okay.
that up. Right? So the distance that light has to travel from way over there is a big factor in how sharp and how blurry that background is. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
So that means your distance from lens to subject, subject to background, is very critical with any kind of photography, right? But with macro photography, because our background isn't typically miles away, it's literally inches away, and our subject is even closer, that range of what is in focus becomes smaller, very, very narrow, right? Because now everything's right here. It doesn't have far to travel. Our focal plane is here. Our background is right here. So our depth of focus is going to be very, very thin. All right. Now, whether you're shooting macro or whether you're shooting landscapes, from that field of focus, it degrades quicker to the front, slower to the back, right? But there's still a certain area that our eyes picks up as acceptable blur, that we perceive it as still being sharp. All right? And then once it transitions, it's a gradual, it's not like all of a sudden it's sharp, 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 and then blurry. It doesn't happen. It's a slow, gradual transition. Okay? But because usually there's a subject here and then nothing behind it, we typically don't see that gradual transition. We just see, oh, this subject that I'm photographing is relatively sharp, and then that background way back there is definitely blurry. Okay? Once we start shortening that distance, all right, we still have the same effect, but the difference in blur has altered because we've gotten closer. That field of blur that was behind the subject is no longer very, very blurry. It's just now somewhat blurry, okay? And in order to create that background blur, we have to pull, that camera has to pull its focus really, really tight in, okay? And now our field of focus is very, very thin in relation to the spatial, the space in total here. All right. So within a far scene, we have a deep depth of field. As soon as we choke up, that depth of field gets narrow, narrow, narrow. All right. You understand that? So what happens is with macro photography, depending on how close you are to your subject will determine how much you have in focus. And it may not necessarily be what you want to be in focus. So we're fighting against the actual technical limitations of physics of the lens and light against our artistic interpretation. So we now have to understand, okay, in order to overcome this, what do I need to do? I can back away, create a little bit more distance between my lens and my subject in order to increase that depth of field, that depth of focus, all right? Make that depth of focus a little bit wider, so hopefully it's a little bit more acceptable sharpness, all right? And that's a very relative term, acceptable sharpness, all right? If we can't do that, because now as we're backing away from our subject is now getting relatively smaller in our frame because we're
Right.
moving away from it. Right?
Right.
So you have to say, okay, if I'm working with a full frame sensor, if I'm working with an APS sensor that has enough megapixels to allow me to crop in, how much can I crop in without really sacrificing image quality? All right. Because when you start cropping and you're removing data, all right, now we are enhancing whatever local contrast is there to begin with. All right. So that's going to accent your sharpness a little bit, not by a lot, but it is still a factor to consider. All right. However, you can crop in order to maximize your subject within the view. Okay. But if you back up away even more, and now your subject is maybe 25% of your screen, all right, and you crop in, well, guess what? You're sacrificing 75% of your data.
Yeah.
And now you're limited to how big you can print that, because now you're going to start seeing all the flaws, because you're now magnifying whatever flaws are there in order to create a big print. You're now sacrificing quality. So that's the balance. All right. So you say, okay, well, I can, and this is where you need to understand your equipment a little bit. You got to say, okay, I can sacrifice 50% of my frame because I know I'm just going to be making 8x10s. Or you can say, I can sacrifice 75, 80% of my frame because I'm just sharing it on social media. It will always be just a digital image. I'll never print it. Okay? Because if you try printing it, it's just going to look like crap. But on screen, because we're limited to the parameters of our digital screens, it may look good. All right. So that's that aspect of it. The other thing is you can say, well, all right, I have access to editing software. I can now take a series of images where I take that very thin field of focus and I shift it along the length of my subject. So I will place my plane of focus in the front, then a little bit behind that, then in the center, then a little bit behind that, and then in the back. So now I have a series of frames that different aspects of the subject are in sharp focus. I can take those 5, 6, 20 frames, however many it takes, import it into Photoshop, and do what's called a focus stack. And what the software does is it looks at all the pixels that are sharp contrast, gets rid of all the pixels that are soft contrast, and stacks them together to create one image of a very tack sharp subject. But you have to make sure that as a photographer that you are able to capture enough data that is in sharp contrast for the software to be able to put it together for you and get good results.
So, can I? When I do that, many times when so the way my lens works, I should put it that way, is when I'm focusing. So I focus on flowers and the petal closest to me. Then I bring it in until I'm like at the bottom of the stamen, right?
Right.
Each time I do that, it looks like it's actually like I'm stationary, my lens is stationary, but as I focus, I looked it up, but I think they call it breathing.
Yeah.
It looks like I'm getting closer to the
Yes.
flower. What does that? Because I notice that when I focus stack, sometimes there's areas that just look awful, and that's not where it looked like. You know what I mean? So I don't know what I did. Like, did I miss spots, or is it the way
Yeah.
the function of the lens, or what is that?
Yeah. But that is an effect of the physics of light on the focus plane, where it looks like, as you shift that focus plane, the size starts altering.
Yeah.
And that's because areas that are blurry tend to expand. All right. They kind of blow out.
Yeah.
All right. And what you're doing is when you shift the focus plane a little bit in, you're altering that area of blurriness. All right. And what was blurry here no longer is blurry here. Other areas are. So it gives you this illusion of things doing this. All right.
Right.
As you travel through.
Uh-huh.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
It's an optical illusion for the most part. And the stacking software tends to compensate for a lot for that. But
Okay.
in order to do it, you have to make sure that you have enough data. And this can be very tricky simply because if you're doing it by hand, if you're focusing by hand, it's very difficult to perceive that field, that focal plane. Okay, because
Right.
you
It
have
is.
you have your focal plane that's always going to be parallel to your camera, right? So if I'm pointing my
Mm-hmm.
camera up, my focal plane is going to be at an angle to me, but parallel to the camera. If I have my camera
Right.
down, all right, it's going to be parallel to the camera, right?
Right.
Which may not be parallel with my subject. Okay? So if I have my subject,
Oh, you're
all
right.
right,
Right.
now as my
Right.
my field of focus, my focal plane, I'll do it. Let me do it like this. This is a little bit stiffer. As my focal plane travels across, all right,
Mm-hmm.
we have a tendency, because we tend to be a little bit more parallel to our subject, we tend to think in terms of this while the camera's actually
Right.
doing this. All right. So what we're doing is we're saying, okay, I'm going to focus here. All right. And then I'm going to focus here. All right. But because it's at an angle, all right, the point of focus isn't necessarily at this top corner, all right, and then here, and then here, all right. It's along this plane. So we tend to lose place of where we are, and we tend to think, okay, I think I got it, but when in actuality you
Right.
probably went too far, and now there's a gap between
Right.
one image and the next, that there's no
Right.
data there. The data's still a little blurry.
Right.
All right, so that's going
That's probably
to
what it is.
right, so that's going to affect it. So
Yeah.
one of the techniques you can do is there's a couple of ways you can overcome this. One, you can get a program that actually does the focus stacking for you in camera and controls your lens for you. There's one very famous one, and it's slipped my mind right now what it is. I'll have to look it up for you. But
What was that again? There's a program.
a program.
Kind of,
You
okay.
plug your camera into you run it on your tablet. You plug your tablet, and the program takes control of your camera's focus, and it will actually move the focus for you. It automatically calculates. So you say, hey, this is my front focus, this is my back focus.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Go ahead and calculate all those images that are needed for me, and then the software will calculate and will actually move the focus for you until you have the appropriate number of images.
You're kidding.
All right.
On any kind of lens, any brand name lens.
Any lens that your camera can communicate properly with. All right. So because you're using a third-party lens,
it won't. Because when I get my metadata, when I download my pictures, my f-stop's never recorded. So my shutter speed is, but my f-stop isn't.
Right.
Because,
okay. So that presents a
it.
problem. Yeah. So you won't be able to use, maybe you won't be able to use an app for yours. Okay.
Right.
I'm actually looking up.
Yeah.
And what the app name is. Okay. And of course, I cannot find it when I need it. Helicon, Helicon. Helicon Focus is Helicon Focus is the software that I've used in the past. The company name is Helicon Soft, Helicon soft.com. All right, so let's say.
Thank you.
No problem. Give it a try. It's an awesome app. I have used it in the past. I don't do a lot of macro, right? Now, the other thing that you can do is you can buy yourself a macro rail. Macro rail. I actually have one, but it's behind my green screen and I don't feel like digging around. All it is a short little slider that you mount your camera to, all right? And it's got a little knob and it's got a little ruler on it, okay? And what you do is you loosen it up and you can move your camera along that rail, all right? So what you do is you set your front focus, the front part of your subject that you want in focus, all right? And you make a note of where it sits on the rail. Then you move it until the back part of your subject is in the focus that you want, and you mark that. You make a mental mark on the ruler, all right? And if you say, it's for the rails, I like using the millimeters because it's easier than imperial, right? If you say, well, that whole distance is, 15 millimeters, right? Then you can say, I'm going to move this every 2 millimeters, all right? And take a picture. And then you can actually see where your camera sits along that ruler, and you can very easily do the division using the ruler, all right? And then you'll be guaranteed that you get all the required frames for your focus stack. But you have to have the appropriate tool.
I get it.
Okay.
That's great to know. I've heard of them, and people have mentioned them, but I never knew how to use them.
Yeah,
So.
and honestly, they're not expensive. You can buy a Chinese knockoff rail on eBay for with shipping for like less than $20. They're
wow.
they're not that expensive. Okay.
Focus better.
Yep. The other thing
All
that
right, thank you.
all right. The other thing that I would suggest also is it's a lot of fun to do, but it can be very frustrating because it's a lot of trial and error. And that's what's called freelensing. All right. Freelensing
Mhm.
is where you take the lens off your camera, you flip it around, and you hold it up against your camera, all right, so that it's not attached. Okay. Give me something just okay. So it's not attached. All right. So you have to be careful with light leak. Okay. But you can literally hold the camera reversed and use that as a macro lens. All right. And people have gotten some
I've heard
really,
about one.
really interesting results with free lensing.
Really? You
now-
scratch your lens that way?
Well, you're not going to be slamming it up against your body. Use your fingers to kind of cup it a little bit. But most of the lenses, they're kind of recessed a little bit in anyway. So the chances of you doing damage to your lens isn't all that great. Now, the fun thing about it is you can take, depending on the type of lens, sometimes you can even angle the lens a little bit to get really funky, play around with that field of focus. All right? Because as soon as you bend the path, you're bending that field of focus. So it's no longer parallel to the sensor.
Right.
All right?
It's like creating a lens baby.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's cool.
So that's something,
Great.
you can play around with and try. It's not going to hurt the camera any. So, all right.
Just try it. Well, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
No problem. Oh, we got some awesome questions tonight. This is great. Who else got another one? I'm good. We still got about 20 minutes or so.
I have a question.
Sure, Rob, go for it.
So I've been asked to photograph fine art paintings by a person. And no matter how hard I tried, first of all, to get rid of glare or anything else, I'm using only ambient light and darkish setting. I don't get the fine detail. For example, the strands of hair that might be painted in loosely in various different places.
Okay.
My focus is on a two-dimensional object, so my depth of field shouldn't matter.
Correct. Okay.
I don't know how to...
All right. I've actually photographed artwork, so this is right up my alley. What kind of artwork are we talking about? Oil painting, acrylic?
Oil.
Oil?
Oil paintings.
All right. And the hand of the painter, is it a heavy hand? Is it a lot of impasto, or is he a light touch, very flat image?
I'm staring at some of it now.
Meaning,
It's not...
I'm concerned with the texture of the paint on the surface. Impasto means that it's very heavy.
It's relatively smooth.
Okay, all right.
It's not dabbed on. It's not like using a flat edge, whatever, and chisel it on.
Right.
Flat. It's very smooth.
Okay, all right.
So it's basically two-dimensional.
Right. Typically, for photographing artwork, the main concern is lighting it properly so you get good color rendition. Okay? With oil painting, you also want to light it in a way that picks up the texture of the canvas, but not so much that it detracts from the painting itself. Okay, so you want enough canvas detail so that when you zoom in, you can say, oh yes, that's an oil painting on canvas because I can see the texture of the canvas, but not so much that the texture overpowers it. And this is all with the way you light it. Ambient light is probably one of the worst types of light for photographing artwork. All right.
Oh well, mistake number one.
Live and learn. Secondly,
like we said before, digital, the cost of the film is free.
Exactly. Yes. The other consideration, and I've discussed this earlier in discussing shooting through a piece of glass, is angle of incidence, angle of reflection. Okay. Angle of incidence, an incidence is your light source. And the angle of reflection is where you can see that light source reflected in whatever it is that you're photographing. All right. So whether it's, birds through a piece of glass or a person's face, every time you see like highlights on a cheek, highlights on a forehead, highlights on the tip of the nose, all these little highlights are a reflection of your incidence, which is whatever light you're using to light your subject. All right, that little bright spot is that spot of light being reflected on the surface of whatever you're photographing. All right, so,
It's like a mirror at that point.
Exactly.
Reflecting the
exactly. All right. How much gets reflected is determined by, obviously, how reflective the surface is. If something's very matte, it's not going to reflect a lot. Something that's very shiny is going to really reflect a lot. But everything that we photograph reflects. If it didn't reflect, we'd be photographing black. Okay? So when we are photographing texture of canvas, what creates that texture is the interplay of the spectral highlights in relation to our shadow. So you have thread that is crossing to create the weave. You have horizontal and vertical threads weaving in and out, in and out, in and out. When we put our lights to the side and shooting it so that it cuts across the surface, what we're doing is we're creating a highlight side on one side and a shadow side on the other. All right, or in this case with the weaving, the parts of the weave that are deeper will be in more shadow than the parts of the weave that are in the front. Makes sense, right?
Yes.
All right. That's what's going to dictate our texture. All right. If we put the light directly next to the camera, all right, there's the camera, here's the texture. If we have the light there, that's going to give us flat lighting. I don't think I need to explain flat lighting to you guys, right? It's where we're basically diminishing any shadow tones. All right, and all we're doing is just for the extent of it, we're just recording all reflected light coming back, no shadow detail. So it's the shadow detail that gives us that texture. So moving the lights to the side, cutting across, gives us those deep pockets of shadow in the weaving. All right, which is going to give us our texture. The next thing you have to take into consideration is your angle of your camera in relation to your subject. So you have a flat painting and you have a flat sensor. Those two need to be parallel to each other. Okay, so now your lens is going to be pointing at the center of your painting. Okay, and of course you want enough distance so that you're getting the entire image without any distortion. So you're going to need a fairly long lens. You don't want anything too short, because then what's going to happen is it's going to get distortions in the corners, and you're not going to get that true squareness of your images. All right, so you're going to need some distance. And you were correct in the assumption that for the most part, your aperture isn't going to play a big role here, because it's going to be flat to the plane of your sensor. All right, so usually the sweet spot of your lens is whatever's in the middle. So if you have a lens that goes from like 4.5 to 22, the center is going to be around 11. That's going to be the sweet spot. Okay. If you've got a lens that goes from like 2.4 to 22, your middle spot's going to be closer to f8. All right. So you want to put your lens at that sweet spot. That sweet spot's going to give you your sharpest focus. Okay. And then when I photograph artwork, I put literally everything into manual. All right. Because once you're focused on the surface of that canvas, the camera's stationary on a tripod, right? All right. That's not going to change. And you should be hanging your images on a wall. All right. Flat. All right. So that's never going to change. The distance is never going to change. Right. The only thing that might change is the width of the canvas framing, right? But most of those are fairly standard, so even that might not change, right? If he uses a very standard frame, the depth of that frame is not going to change a lot. So all you got to do is lift one off, put the next one on, you're good to go. I take it they're unframed and not behind glass for these paintings, right?
Not behind glass.
Yeah.
Correct.
Okay, so you don't have to really worry about that. By placing your lights on each side, all right, you're going to really minimize that angle of incidence, angle of reflection, all right, because now they're at an extreme angle to the camera lens, all right. And then the other consideration is you want those light sources to be bigger than your subject. All right. And I usually use the 5-foot strip boxes for when I do artwork photography, because I know no matter what, I'm usually not photographing anything bigger than 5 feet. So I'll put, 5 foot on each side, shooting across each other. All right. So I'm not hitting the artwork directly with my lights. The lights are actually shooting across the front of it. So I'm picking up that nice texture of the canvas. I'm getting even illumination. All right. I will then also use one of these. All right, the X-Rite. I will photograph this in order to make sure that I get proper color rendition when I process my images. All right. If you don't have these, at least get yourself a neutral color balance card that you can shoot in, your initial frame. All right. You just need it in the initial frame. All right, that you can refer to set your white balance. All right, so this plays a key part. All right, so your first frame is always going to be, once you have your light set up, even distribution on the surface. all right, because we're not looking for fancy lighting here. We want the corners of the artwork to be as evenly lit as the center. No hot spots. Okay? Once everything's evenly lit, we place our color card there or our color checker. Take a photo. This is going to be our control. Everything's going to be calibrated to that color. All right? And then from there on, it's just click, take a couple of shots, for posterity check. Take one down, put the next one up, click, click, click. Take it down, put the next one up, click, click, click. All right? And what I normally do is...
fine detail.
What's that?
I'm losing the fine detail.
All right. If you're properly...
Is that because I don't have the lighting for it?
If you're properly focused, you should be getting that fine detail. All right. Now, the other thing is you don't want a lot of empty space around the images. So what I normally do is I batch the photos according to size. So if I know I have three paintings that are 24 by 36, I'll shoot those so that they fill the frame. Okay. And then if the next ones are 18 by 24s, I'll, put my first one up, bring my camera closer in order to fill the frame, and then I'll shoot that series. All right. And then if, so you batch them according to size. That way you're not going, oh, this one's back, this one's forward, this one's back. You want to keep the workload, keep your workflow proper. All right. Batch them according to size. Move the camera to the appropriate size so that it fills the frame. That way you're going to maximize the quality of the image, and you should be able to pick up that detail. All right. If you're losing detail, it's because you're either too contrasty with your lights and you're getting too much texture coming through, killing the detail. All right. Or your lights are positioned wrong where you're getting too much specularity that's then killing the detail. All right.
Thank you.
Another thing that will help is one of these. All right. You want to get, and this is one of those tools that you're going to measure the output of your light on your subject, not the reflected light off the subject. Because what happens is, let's say the first image is this blazing red image with lots of yellows and whites and oranges. All right. And you meter for it, you're immediately going to be metering it wrong. I can guarantee you. Then the next one is this more drab, muted images with deep darks and browns and olive greens. And you take a reflective meter, reading off of that gives you a totally different camera setting for no reason whatsoever other than the colors on the canvas are different. The lights have not changed. All right. So by being able to use one of these to set your lights, you're setting it to that middle gray, which takes away any color influence from whatever it is that you're photographing. All right. So this is another control for getting proper exposure. If you don't have one, not a big deal. Get yourself a middle gray card. Set your exposure to that middle gray card. All right. Set the camera, lock it in. You're in manual. Don't change anything. Shift one image out, put the next one in, click, 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 click. Take that one out, put the next one in, click, 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 click. The lights have not changed. Your settings should not change. Okay. Now, let's take one quick step back. In order to properly set your lights, you want to make sure that your lights that you're using to illuminate your subject are also not being influenced by your ambient light. So that means your first shot, your test, when you're setting up your lights, the first shot I take is an ambient shot. And I will make sure that I have my camera set to remove any ambient light. And what that means is when I look at it in the back of my camera, I should see a black screen. All right. That black screen tells me that ambient light is not affecting my scene. I then place my lights, and then I will use this to set the power of the lights. Okay?
Thank you.
All righty. So try it out. Let me know how it works out for you. And if we need to, troubleshoot it, we can troubleshoot it for you. Okay?
Thank you.
All
I
right.
had one
Yep.
other question from me earlier about what?
About?
Only kidding.
I missed
It was
it.
probably about me not being able to log in.
Oh. Yeah. That's right. So anyhow, before you actually logged in, I was mentioning to everybody else how you and I are going to be putting together the trip. And I couldn't remember the town name. It finally dawned on me. It was Norwich. That we're going to be putting together a trip to Norwich.
As they would say Norwich.
Norwich. Really?
They would call it Norwich. Yeah, Norwich.
Okay, well, they'll spot me as an outsider.
I've been driving to that courthouse, and I have to actually move to go plug in. What I've been doing while here is I have lots of birds in the backyard, and I've been turning around and photographing them, Carol.
Yeah, there you go.
So that's what I've been going to the town for years and years for this court.
Mm-hmm.
But I just started to cover the beauty of the town. And, there's three areas that you and I have talked about.
Right.
The very old section, which is pre-revolutionary into post-revolutionary. The business center, which is late 1800s into the 1900s. And then there's the Norwich Free Academy area, which is primarily Victorian age
Mm-hmm.
and a lot of Victorian architecture.
Yeah, and that's always pretty to photograph.
And it's really interesting that you can have three well-preserved areas within a 2-mile stretch.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So I'm looking forward to an outing. Need to get out into fresh air. I've been cooped up for just way too long. And I'm sure everybody can relate to that. So.
Mm-hmm.
But so as I mentioned to everybody, you'll be posting once we decide, what we're doing and when we're doing it. Rob will be posting it on his site, which is Hartford Amateur Photographers Group on Facebook. Right. And like I said, if you're not a member, go ahead and send Rob a member request. And then I'll be posting it on my Facebook group as well, which is, Learn Photography with Duck. So hopefully we'll get a good group. I'm really looking forward to it.
I expect that we will. I was going to be doing this in April.
Okay.
And I actually had the person who wrote the book on some of these areas going to be our tour guide. Unfortunately, it all fell through because we had to socially distance and stay inside.
Yeah.
But it'll be a lot of fun. There were a bunch of people who had already prepaid for the event, and so I expect that it will be. Everything was refunded. Don't worry. I'm an honest man.
Yeah.
Sort of.
Well, I know you. Yeah, go ahead.
The only thing I would be concerned about are numbers. I think that we will get more people than perhaps social distancing would allow.
Yeah. But my biggest concern with having a quote unquote tour guide is, and I've experienced this with tour groups that have gone through Yale. Jesse at Milford Photo has done it, where he gets somebody from Yale to give us a tour of the Yale property. Is the tour guide has one agenda that typically does not match the agenda of photographers. So,
let's get to the end.
Yes, exactly.
I've experienced that.
Yeah, and it's very frustrating because
Very.
So I'd rather just keep it.
I'm going to be doing a lot of reading about the things that she wrote. In fact, I'm going to be getting her book, so I can have like the experts work with. The one thing that she was going to be doing that we probably wouldn't be able to do on our own is get us into or meet some of the people who live in the houses and preserve them and maintain them, or maybe descended from the family.
Wow.
So
Yeah, that's
That
nice.
she was able to do for us. But it's okay. I can talk to her and go another day with her too.
Right.
Just as a tour.
Right.
But
if you're there,
it'll be a lot of fun. It'll be a lot of fun.
Yeah, but if you're, I understand you have a lot of knowledge about some of the buildings that will be going there, but because you're also a photographer, you'll be able to pace it according to the pacing of the group, rather than the group being paced to the tour guide. So I think it's going to work out better in that respect.
So, I hope so.
Because I know when I'm photographing,
there'll be a lot of fun regardless.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Absolutely. But when I'm photographing something, especially of historical importance, if I don't get that information on site, which I normally don't, because my head is not about collecting information; it's about collecting a useful image. But usually in the post-processing part, that's when I'll do my research and do a little bit more investigative work about what it is that I photographed. And it's like, oh, wow, I didn't know that about this. I learned something new. But that usually happens when I'm editing the image, not typically when I'm on site. So, but yeah, I'm looking forward to it. So
am I. It's in my calendar.
Cool. All right, guys. Well, it's 8:00. It was a great session. I had a lot of fun. Hopefully you guys learned a little something. All right.
Definitely. Thank you.
Awesome.
Thank you so much.
All righty.
Thanks, Chris.
Thank you.
Excellent as usual.
Cool beans. And what I want to remind you is that I recorded this session, and I will be posting it to my YouTube channel. So if at any point, you say, oh, what was it that he said? You can always refer back to the video and get the information that way. All right. That being said, if you go to my YouTube channel, which is also Learn Photography with Duck on YouTube, if you can go ahead and subscribe, that'd be a great boon on me. I want to get my membership up to be a little over 100. That's my goal, to reach the 100 viewer points. I'm not some big YouTuber, I'm not going to get, thousands of thousands, but if I can hit 100, that'd be awesome. Also, if you really like what I have to offer, I do have a Patreon page. Again, Learn Photography with Duck on Patreon. Carol's a Patreon. Bonnie's a Patreon. Thank you guys so much. Your support really, really does help. And once that money starts coming in from the Patreon, I'm actually looking at possibly switching over to a paid Zoom account where we get a little bit more control over our stream than the free Google Meet. So that's my goal.
Can I suggest you look at Microsoft Teams? I have Microsoft Teams free, allow people limited time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And it replaces Microsoft Hangout something.
Yeah.
But Microsoft Teams.
Okay. Yeah. I'll give that a look. Bill Delaney also suggested another one that I tried, and it just did not play well with Zoom. And that's going to be the key, because I use Zoom for all my scene switching. So Zoom actually feeds into Google Meet, and I know it works really, really well with Zoom as well as Google Meet, because I've used both platforms with OBS. So I would have to see that if it plays well with Microsoft, then I'll consider that as well. But right now, so far, Zoom has met all my expectations. So that's the only reason.
At $15 a month.
Hey, that's why I'm using Google Meet for now, because it's free. It's got a lot of limitations, but it's free. So, but anyways, guys, I really appreciate you guys. It means a great deal with your patronage. So I just wanted to say thank you. And again, thank you for coming out and spending this evening with me. I'm glad that you guys got something out of this. And next Monday, I'm off. But the following Monday after that, come and join me. And it's all about Lightroom. Okay? So I'll be posting it on my Facebook page. Okay? Awesome, guys. Thank you so much. Peace out.
Have a good night.
Good night.
Good night, Doc. Good night.
Thank you. Good night, all.
Thank you. Good night.
Bye, Pam.
Thank you for watching Learning Photography with Duck. Brought to you in association with Milford Photo, your local full-service camera store. Located in downtown Milford, Connecticut, Milford Photo offers you a personalized shopping experience. From the latest camera gear to printing and framing services. And, of course, educational workshops to teach you the finer aspects of photography. Don't forget to tell them Duck sent you.